Okay, so let's continue over here. We're doing in we're doing on 26a in Moed Katan. Okay, we're continuing. Tana Rabbana. So we talked about because they heard the blasphemy previously. We learned because they heard the blasphemy, so and they rendered the garment. So we say they came cruel begotten. That means that when you hear blasphemy, you have to render your garment. That's how we learned it. So the Gemara says like this: Ton Rabbana. We learned in Abraisa. Echad Hashemeya. Whether you actually heard the blasphemy, or ve'echad Hashemeya mipi Hashemeya, or if you hear it from somebody who heard it, from the mouth of somebody. Let's say you say to somebody else, I heard this guy blaspheme Hashem. So when you're saying what you heard him say, uh, you too, the person that hears you, has to render his garment, even though you're not blaspheming Hashem. You're just quoting that the other person blasphemed, that the other person was Mevarach Hashem. You still chayiv l'kroya. So whether you hear yourself or you hear from somebody else who heard, chayiv l'kroya, you're obligated to render. Now, the Gemara says, "V'ha'edim einom chayivim l'kroya." The witnesses, they don't have to render the garments. In other words, when they come to Beis Din and they testify that this is what the other one said, so the Beis Din themselves would have to render the garment. But the witnesses who are telling the Beis Din what the other one said, they einon chayovim likroya. They don't have to render the garments. Why? Because shekvar koru b'shosh sheshomu. The witnesses have already rendered the garment when they heard it the first time. So therefore, when they're repeating it, they don't have to render the garment. The Beis Din that hears it from the witnesses, they would have to render the garment. But the witnesses themselves, they don't have to render the garments. Why? Because they already ripped the garments when they heard. Frei Gemara, b'shosh shomu, my happy the time that they heard. So what is? But now they're hearing it again. So why do you say that if they hear it again, but here they're hearing it again? And the Gemara says, Loi salka daitoch. This shouldn't enter your mind, no, because the Ksiv, the Gemara brings a proof, because they went, when they came back to Chizkiah and told him what this Rabeshka has cursed Bashemit, it says, when the king Chizkiyahu heard, Vayikra es Begodov, so he said that he ripped his garments. So we're saying, Hamelech Korah ve'hem loy koru. The Melech rendered, but they didn't render the garment. Why? Because they already rendered the garment. So even though they are saying it again, they're saying what he said, but still it was not necessary for them to render the garments again. Okay. So here we said that if you rip the garment for a nosin, a beis din, a shmuas roes, for one of these that we learned above, and shmuas roes, you have to render your garment. So we brought a proof, but we also said v'loy misachim, you can't sew them together. Minolon, how do you know that you can't sew them together? Before the Gemara brought a pasuk for when the Gemara talked about the about father and mother and his teacher, and the Gemara brought the pasuk. It says "Vayikorim shnayim," he ripped them into two. So the Gemara asks, why did it have to say that he ripped them into two? We're talking about Elisha when he was crying for Eliyahu, when he flew up in the Besara, in the storm out into the heaven. So he says he ripped his garment into two. So the Gemara says, why does it have to say into two? If you ripped his garment, it means to two. The Gemara says, from this we learn that it always has to remain two. So that we learn for father, mother, and his teacher. But how do we know in this case when it's for a Nasi and Avbezdin and Shmu Yisrael that you can't misachin, minolon? And the Gemara says, Osi kriya kriya, we have Gzeir Shava. Over here it says they rendered, over there it says Vayikra, Kera Kera David. Asya kriya kriya, we have a Gzeir Shava. Here it says rendered, and by David it says rendered. And by David we said Kora Lishnayim, that he didn't sew it together. So we learn Gzeir Shava that we also, when you rip for a Nasi and a based in Shmu Yisrael, you don't render them. Then the Gemara also says about a Sefer Torah. The Gemara, Sefer Torah shenisraf minolam. What do we know if you witnessed a Sefer Torah that was burnt? How do you know you have to render your garment? So the Gemara, this ksiv, the Gemara brings the story, and this story is King Yehoiakim. He was responding to Yirmiyahu, his prophecy about the destruction. Yirmiyahu was warning the Jewish people that they were going to be destroyed. They brought before King Yehoiakim, they brought before him the Megillah, the write-up of Yirmiyahu, which had the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, that Yirmiyahu gave it over to Baruch ben Neriah. Yirmiyahu told Baruch ben Neriah to write it down. So then there was a Yehudi, somebody who served the king. He read 3 or 4 verses from it at a time. After 3 or 4 verses, he ripped it. He ripped that part with the blade of the scribe's blade and threw it into the fire. So he read 3 or 4 psukim, and then he threw it in the fire because he didn't want to accept it. Yehoiakim, the rebuke that Yirmiyah said. So it says like this: the ksiv. It says in Yirmiyah Lamed Vav, Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Chav Gimel, Vayi Kikora Yehudi. When this Yehudi person there was reading Sholish Dalsos V'Arba, 3 doors and 4, it means 3 psukim and 4 psukim. 3 and 4 psukim. Sholish Dalsos V'Arba means 3 and 4. It means the 4th pasuk. Kolomer Arba psukim. Another way of saying 4, 3, and then the 4th one. So Vayikro Betar HaSefer. So he ripped it up with the knife, with the blade of the scribe. He put it into the fire that was on the chimney, on the warming of the house over there, and the fireplace. He threw it out, he burnt it over there. Why did he wait for 3, 4 psukim from now this is basically the kinos, the lamentation that we have today, that we say, those are the write-up from Eicha. That is what Yirmiyahu wrote. And he read 3, 4. What is it 3 and 4? What happened over here? So Amru Leila Yehoiakim, they said to Yehoiakim, Kosav Yirmiyahu Sefer Kinus. Yirmiyahu wrote a book of lamentation. Amar Lahu, so he said to the people, Maxi, what does it say in that book of lamentation? So he told them for the beginning of Eicha, it said, Eicha Yoshva Badad, how she sits alone. The city of Yerushalayim. So Amalahu, so he said to his people, that doesn't refer to me. I'm no Malka. I'm the king. It doesn't say anything bad about the king. It just says about Yerushalayim. So he says, I'm no Malka. Malka loy ksiv klum. Doesn't say anything about the king. Doesn't bother me. It didn't write anything against Yehoiakim. Amalei. So then they said to him, Further, the next pasuk, it says, "Bochei tifke balaylo," that she will cry in the nighttime. The second pasuk of Eicha. He said again, "I know Malka. That doesn't affect me. I'm the king." They read the third pasuk. It says, "Golso Yehuda me'oni," that Yehuda has been exiled from, they're destitute, from being poor. He says, "I know Malka." Doesn't refer to me. It talks about Yehuda, not about the king. And then finally, so that's 1, 2, 3. Then finally, he said, "Darki tzion avelis." The ways of tzion are mourning. He still said, "I know Malka, I'm the king, and not going to affect me." That was the red four psukim. Finally, when they came to the fifth pasuk, they said, they read, "Hoyut soreho l'roish." The enemy became the head. He was the king, and in this pasuk, he says the enemies will become the head. Hoyut soreho l'roish shahanochri roish v'leyato. That means that the stranger, the goy, the nochri will be the head, and not you. So that's already directed against him. Amar lahu. So he said to them, "An omro." Who said this? So he quotes the next pasuk. It says, "Ki Hashem hoiga al roish." Hashem did this all for the many sins that she committed. So basically, Hashem is doing this for him. So he got angry. This is what Hashem is saying. Miyad kodar. So he punctured. He made a hole. Kolas kodesh shaba. All of the names of Hashem that's within it. V'sorfam be'ish, and he burnt it in the fire. He threw it in the fire. He got angry at Hashem because they told him that Hashem is the one. That's what the pasuk says. Hashem. So behind the ksiv. So and this is what it says. That v'loy pochadu v'loy koru bigdeim. That they weren't afraid, meaning the people that heard all the bad things are going to happen to them. Yoakim and his group over there, they weren't afraid. And it says they didn't render their garments. So what does this tell you? That because they burnt it and they burned the name of Hashem, miklal debo lemikra, that means that they should have rendered it. That's how you know when you rip a Sefer Torah or the name of Hashem, in this case, in the Kinois, when he went and he burnt it, ripped it out, and they burnt it, they should have rendered their kid, because it says they weren't scared, the people. They were, and they didn't rip their garments. So you know that the boy Mikra. So why were they supposed to render the garments? Because he burnt the Kinois and the name of Hashem. So that's how we know if you burn the name of Hashem. But maybe, so Papa said to Abai, how do you know that it's because of the name of Hashem that he burned? Maybe they should have rendered the garment because of the bad news. Told them that there's going to be destruction, all of the kinois that he read for them. So they should have rendered the garment because of the bad news. Maybe they should have rendered for the. How do you know that you have to render because the name of Hashem was burnt, was torn and burned? Maybe it's for the exile. That's the bad news. Amalei. So he said back to him, Shmuas Rois by Yishayta B'Hamim, was there any bad news in that time? So therefore, he did not have to. He did not have to tell them anything. He wouldn't have to render the garment. When you say Shmuas Rois, that means something news happened. You're not going to worry about. You're not going to render your garments because eventually they're going to go into exile. That's not the obligation of Shmuas Rois. So therefore, they did not. It wasn't for that. So why did they render the garment? Why should have they rendered the garment? Because the name of Hashem was burnt. That's how we know that a Sefer Torah shenisraf, that you need to render your garment. Then we learn further, Ora Yehuda. What is Ora Yehuda? The cities of Yehuda. The cities of Yehuda is more Minolan. What do we know if you see the destructions of the cities of Yehuda? The Ksiv. So what's the story over there? Over there is it says that after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, so 80 people from Shechem, from Shiloh, from Shomron, they came with a mincha and lavoina. They came to the house of Hashem, to the place where the Beis Hamikdash was, in order to mourn for the destruction. And they were all shaved, their beards were shaved, their garments were ripped, and they were misguided. They had the wounds like mourning. And on the way there, they came across Yishmael ben Netanya, who he ended up murdering many of them. And that's what he did after they killed Gedalia ben Achikam. That's why we fast some Gedalia after Rosh Hashanah. They went and they killed them and many of the other people over there. So it says, "Vayavoyu anoshim mishchem mishilo mishemrim." These people came from Shechem, Shiloh, and Shemrim. Shmoinim ish, these were 80 men. Megulochi zoken, they were shaved beards. Ukrue begodim, their garments were ripped. Umizgoidedim, and they were with wounds. Umincha levaina biyodom, and they had a mincha and levaina in their hand. Lavi beis Hashem, going to bring to Hashem Hashem. So why were they rendered garments? Because they came and they saw the destruction. This was the Churban. So that's why, because they were part of the cities of Yehuda that were all destroyed. It was the Churban, and that's why they were already ripped garments. So you see that for the Churban, you rip your garments. So Chelba said the name of Biro and the name of Rabbi Lezer. One who sees the destruction of the cities of Yehuda, Omer, he says, Ore kochecha hoyu midbar, your holy cities turned into a desert, and then v'koreya, then he renders the garments. If he sees Yerushalayim b'churbana, Omer, when he sees Yerushalayim in the destruction, he says, Tzion midbar hoyso, the Tzion turned into a desert. Yerushalayim shmama, and Jerusalem is desolate. And then v'koreya, then he renders. What happens when he sees Beis Hamikdash b'churbana, Omer? If he sees the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, he says, Beis Kochenu v'tifartenu, our home, our holy home and our beautiful home. Asher hilelucha v'seinu, who our fathers praised you with, hoyo l'sreifas eish, was burnt by fire. V'chol machmadenu, and all of our precious treasures, hoyo l'chorba, were destroyed. V'korea. This is a pasuk in Yishai. Okay, so these are the different psukim you say for the different destructions of the different parts, seeing the Ore Yehuda, seeing Yerushalayim, and seeing Beis Hamikdash. Then we said in the Brai said that Kereya al Mikdash u'meisiv al Yerushalayim. So first you rip on the Mikdash, and then you add to the rip. You rip further for Yerushalayim. That you continue the rip.
Going to be the other way around. It's first you'd have to see Yerushalayim before you can see the Beis Hamikdash.
Very good. Very good. Okay, but let's first see the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Urimino, I'll ask you a question. It says, Echod HaShemeya ve'echod HaRoya, whether you hear or you see. Kivan she'egia l'tzoifim, once you come to Scopus, to Mount Scopus, Korea, then you render your garment. And then it says, V'koreya al Mikdash b'fnei atzmai. First, you render on the Beis Hamikdash by itself. By Yerushalayim b'fnei atzmai, Yerushalayim by itself. You don't just add to the rip. but you do separately for Yerushalayim, for the Mikdash and for Yerushalayim. So why are we saying here first the Mikdash and then Yerushalayim? The Gemara says like Kashi. How the poga be Mikdash bereisha? How the poga Yerushalayim bereisha? That in the Mishnah, by us in the Braisa, it was talking about he first bumped into the Mikdash. So Yerushalayim, you can add to the Kriya of the Mikdash. Well, how did he come into the Mikdash before he saw Yerushalayim? He says, how the Pog Yerushalayim, if you see first Yerushalayim, you do one for Yerushalayim, you do a separate one for the Beis HaMikdash. But if you saw first the Beis HaMikdash, how did you see the Beis HaMikdash? How did you see Mikdash before Yerushalayim? So Trashi, how the Pog the Mikdash Bereisha. Kegoing Shenichnas Yerushalayim, like he entered Yerushalayim, B'Sheda Teva Migdal. He was in a box. Different kinds, in a tower, in an enclosed area. He didn't see Yerushalayim till you saw the Beis HaMikdash. So then, Korei al HaMikdash, you can rip for the Mikdash. Umoisiv al Yerushalayim, you can add Yerushalayim. Avol b'shalei nichnas b'teva. But if you didn't go into the box, upoga b'Yerushalayim bereisha, first you come against Yerushalayim, Korei al Yerushalayim b'fnei atzma. Then first you render for Yerushalayim, and then Val HaMikdash b'fnei atzma, and for the Mikdash itself. That's the Gemara says, Lakashi, the Pog of Mikdash versus the Pog of Yerushalayim. So if you see first the Mikdash, you do the Mikdash, you can add. If you see Yerushalayim first, then you have to do separately, one for Yerushalayim and one for the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, we'll leave it over here today, and we'll figure out what to do about next week. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Take care.